the shoulder girdle in the rib cage. Like your scapula have no choice but to ride on the position of the rib cage, right? And their function, how well they glide, is dictated by that position.
May I have your attention, please?
Give him a heater.
Now listening to
Clear the Mechanism.
The Robby Row Show.
The Robby Row Show.
Okay, guys, what's going on? It's Robby Row, and this is the Robby Row Show, episode 36. My guest today is Dana Santis, a.k.a. the Mobility Maker. I won't go too much of her background because she spends a good part of the beginning of this podcast talking about her journey and how she kind of came to be. And if you haven't already, go check her stuff out on the websites. What am I saying? The websites? No, her website, mobilitymaker.com, and her Instagram, mobilitymaker. Man, it's just a lot of free content, a lot of good stuff that I highly encourage you to check out. Especially after you hear this podcast, you're going to want to know more about her. You're going to want to know what you can do to better yourself just from what she's saying in this show, because I know I definitely did. So a good outlet for you to go check her out on is YouTube, Mobility Maker as well. I will link all of her stuff into the show notes. And again, the show notes are just whatever outlet you're listening to it on, say like Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, SoundCloud. There should be a button on that player that says like details, or maybe an arrow, like a drop-down button. And you just click that, and it'll come down like a bunch of words and stuff. And the link you should just be able to click it, and it'll direct you right to the site or her Instagram or whatever. So I will link that. As for me, my name is Robby Row, and I'm the host of the Robby Row Show. I know, cliche, corny, insert your word there, right? And you can follow me on Instagram at RobbyRow12. And I highly encourage you, if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button to this podcast. Go ahead and share it to any of your friends that maybe would like to hear one of these podcast episodes with some of the great guests that I've had on. And I'm not taking any hard feelings. I know you guys listen to the show just for the guests. Like, it's not me. I'm just asking questions. Totally get it. Okay, I'm done talking. Anyways, this is episode 36. Dana Santis, the Mobility Maker. Let's get to it, guys. Okay, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Robby Row Show. We got episode 36, and Dana Santis, like 99% sure I pronounced that right, is my guest for the show today. Dana, welcome to the show. How you doing?
I'm great. And you did. You pronounced it correctly.
It's funny because I think I've had so this is 36 episodes. I want to say more than half have been like individuals with names that can be pronounced maybe 2 or 3 different ways. I don't know how that happens, but it's like my worst nightmare is like mispronouncing someone's name in the introduction and then it just being an awkward podcast all the way through. And yeah, anyways, but glad we got that straight.
Yeah. Well, I think some people call me Mobility Maker just because they don't have to say my name. Then they don't have to even guess. They're just like Mobility Maker. So
that's funny because that's an angle that I almost played like right before we started the show. But I feel like you get your identity wrapped up in that, and I didn't want to. I guess I didn't want to like start it off with that, but that's actually a good segue into our first talking point is Mobility Maker. So if you can, like, give us a brief outline upon like how Mobility Maker came to be.
Well, that actually, it was either a strength coach or an athletic trainer at a team who had come up with that nickname for me. And it was, I want to say 6 years ago. And during that time, we were really transitioning from calling any of my sessions like yoga sessions because it was so much more. And we wanted to give guys the right expectation. And I think it was a trainer at the Lightning. And he was like, well, you're the Mobility Maker. And right around the same time, I had started working with Turner Broadcasting, and like part of the contract to work with them, I didn't have social media then. And part of the contract was that I needed to set up social media on all platforms. Mm-hmm. So I needed to have a name for that too. So it all happened around the same time. And I thought, all right, then Mobility Maker, that's what so I've never had a different name on social media. And And yeah, and by some standards, I'm kind of new to it, I think I've had my Instagram for only like 5 years,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, that's how it came to
So do
be.
you give him credit every single day that you're called Mobility Maker?
No, because I like, as I'm saying it, I'm like, I think it was
Oh, so you
the
don't know.
assistant athletic trainer for the Lightning. Like, I don't know.
Well, then you
I'm
take
old
credit for
now.
it.
The first thing to go is your memory, right?
Age is
So
just a number. That's another rabbit
I'm
hole
just
we could
kidding.
dive down into, right? You're supposed to tell me that, right? That's your avenue. But so I'm curious as far as what got you to where you are now. Like what kind of sparked the interest in the things that you cover today.
So, well, it's ever evolving, of course.
Right.
I mean, I'm a massive nerd, but as a child, I was into gymnastics,
Mm-hmm.
which and I really enjoyed it. And there was no, as I look back now, there was no real regard though for biomechanics, or I mean the way that I would bend my spine probably accounts for the multiple herniated discs that I have now.
Ah.
So it's interesting to look back on that, but I liked being able to control my body that way and figure out these cool things that I could actually do with this meat suit, that I've been blessed with. So I was always interested in that, but then it wasn't like something that I, wanted to go to college to be a gymnast. And actually, the way that I grew up, that wasn't that wasn't even a possibility. I was a teenage mother. I grew up really, really poor,
Mm-hmm.
and so I didn't come back to like physical fitness even until after college. And I was going to Tufts University, and that's in Boston. And that's when I really also started to get into sports. And if any of your audience is from the Boston area or a Boston sports fan, you know how diehard fans are in Boston, and how like being part of the Boston sports world is like a religion there. And so
Right.
it was a really cool thing to be part of and to really start to be that interested in sports, like those kinds of sports. I mean, I watched gymnastics and that kind of stuff, but really like team sports and the NFL, NHL, NBA, and MLB, and so it was all the Boston teams. And that's actually where I started my business, but it wasn't until I got out of corporate America. So anyway, going back to, you grow up poor and you think that the answer to all of your problems, if you've been poor, is the flip side, right? So I wanted to be the antithesis of the way that I grew up. So I was on this mission to make a ton of money. And I got there. I was in corporate America. I was head of marketing and PR for an international corporate real estate firm, like right out of college.
Mm-hmm.
And I did that for about 5 years, and I got the big house, multiple BMWs. It was absolutely the antithesis. I could probably fit every trailer that I had ever lived in this big house that yeah, I
Ballin'.
had, right?
Yeah.
And so there's a certain level of satisfaction that came with that, but it was short-lived because it's not authentic. Like I hadn't chosen this career path based on doing something that I loved.
Right.
I was just kind of running from my past. And then I started to realize, I've got nannies raising my kids. I'm traveling all over the country, for my work. And as exciting as it was, I started to recognize that this wasn't what I really wanted to do. And at that time too, to manage all of the stress, because I don't want to make it seem like it's easy to make all of that money. I mean, it was also corporate real estate, so there was a certain level of ease, but 80-hour weeks and always being on planes and like commuting back and forth to New York. Our headquarters were in the Chrysler building in New York, so I was flying all the time. My body hurt. My mind hurt. Like I was stressed. I didn't like the person I was turning into. So I started taking like spin classes whenever I could. Now, one of the cool things about all the travel I did, was I stayed in all the Ritz-Carltons and the really nice hotels, and they always have spas, and they have like all these different group fitness classes you can take.
Mm.
And my very first yoga class was it was in Florida. I think it was Miami, like a Ritz-Carlton in Miami.
Wasn't on the beach, huh?
It wasn't out on the beach. We were actually inside, and there was this crazy dude in a Speedo with like the man bun and like typical. It could not have been more typical. I don't even think we had mats. We had like these blanket things, woven blanket things, and it smelled like incense, and it was everything you would imagine, right? But it was in this really nice hotel. So, what I liked about it was I was like, initially I was drawn to, oh, wow, this kind of seems like toned down adult gymnastics. Cause he was doing all these crazy twisty things and
he had a man.
Right. He had a man bun, which that's like the prerequisite. Once you have that, then you can do all
you actually get your
things.
certificate of yoga training once you get a man bun, I heard.
I think so. Yeah, it's true. Anyway, so we do all of that. And I'm liking it. I thought it was a little weird, like he would touch you and stuff. I think there's a lot of stuff in yoga that I'm not thrilled about. But at the very end, he had us all lie down and just focus on our breathing.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the first time in my entire life that I'd ever done that, ever. Like, and to slow down for that long, because think about it, I was in a race against myself, right? To get away from my past, to be as successful as I possibly could, blah, blah, blah. And now all of a sudden there's like 3 minutes of nothing. I can't work on anything. I can't do anything. I just have to lie there and breathe. And it's like I just tapped into, even for like a split second, but something that was authentic, something that was really me, something that wasn't all the stuff that, and
You're present.
Also, yes, I was totally present, but I also didn't feel like I had to put up this big wall of, look at all my accomplishments. This is how great I am, because I wouldn't want anybody to know who I really was, because I didn't know. And not to get like esoteric and crazy.
I don't know what that word
but
means, so you can go ahead and get esoteric.
Not to be like so weird and out there. And
no,
like,
so I love that stuff. I don't know. I can't speak for my listeners, but I dig that stuff.
Well, I'm like a geek, so I'm a science geek, and I like things to be grounded in research and proven. And so this was, this was just me. It was about what I was really feeling. So there was a lot of being uncomfortable in that as well, but being okay about being uncomfortable.
Yeah, vulnerability.
And so that was a turning point for me. But then not a complete turning point, because again, I had to be the best at whatever. I had to like conquer whatever. So now if yoga is my thing, I'm not going to just take yoga classes. I'm going to become certified in yoga classes. And then, I'm going to take it to the next level and the next level. So again, I traveled all the time for my work, and I was able to kind of find the best like yoga teacher trainings that I could during all of my trips. And I kind of like, add a couple days at the beginning or the end of a trip so that I would be able to take these courses. And I say courses, but they're like trainings. So like Manju Joyce, if anybody's familiar with yoga, he's the son of Patabi Joyce, who's like known as the father of Ashtanga yoga.
Mm-hmm.
And I haven't really even spoken about yoga in so long that, oh, sorry. I have 3 rescue dogs, and the school bus is letting the kids off. And anyway, all right, come on, guys. So I would take all of these courses, and that's how I became like certified in yoga. And then I started teaching yoga classes at like Boston Sports Club. Now I still had, by the way, this top level corporate job. But now I'm also getting paid $30 an hour to teach yoga classes at Boston Sports Club. But I freaking loved it. Like I loved it.
Right.
And so there would be times I would be rushing, like I would be changing travel for the job that was making me, high 6 figures, to rush to my $30 an hour job at Boston Sports Club. And it just, that started to make me realize, wait a minute, this is what I really love to do. And does all this stuff matter? And am I living the life that I really want to live? And having more of those moments now where all it was me and my breath and the present moment, I had time to really contemplate what it was I really wanted. And to try to do it in a smart way. So I worked on a business plan for possibly opening up a yoga studio, but there was still something eating away at me. Not only the fact that the business plan showed me that I wasn't going to make money for like 4 years. So there was that, but then there was right. But then there was also the part that was saying there's something about yoga that just isn't you. Like it's not quite right because again, grounded in science and research and the things that I really liked. And also I thought some of the extreme end ranges of motion just didn't seem right. And some of what they were teaching about different breathing techniques didn't make a whole lot of sense to me because based on what I knew about the nervous system. And I had a lot more questions than I had answers. And then you'd always be going back to yogic texts to get answers. But I'm like, yeah, just because an 80-pound Indian guy did this 5,000 years ago doesn't mean that
not to stereotype or anything.
Thanks for pointing that out. Yes, I apologize for being probably not politically correct. Oh. But anyway, and now remember, I love sports. So now I'm looking at all these athletes and I'm like, oh my gosh, so many of these movements and it would be good for them. And the circles that I was in, I had the opportunity to talk to owners of teams and to talk to professional athletes and I found out that really, and now think about this is like 15 or 16 years ago, there really was not a whole lot of mobility being done in professional sports. Even warm-ups and, team stretch, when you look at baseball has even come a long way, but baseball's evolved a ton in like the past 7 years. But back then, now it was unheard of.
That's in all sports too, right? Like that's not just baseball, that's in all professional sports.
Yes, absolutely. But baseball was even more backwards at that time than any other sport. But yeah, all sports. And so when I decided I wanted to do yoga in sports, I was one of the, if not the first person really doing that, like especially pitching it to teams. Mm-hmm. So I decided to dive headfirst into it, and I looked up the head strength coach, so head coach or manager, the head of strength and conditioning, the head athletic trainer, and then I picked 3 players on every single team in all 4 major sports. So that was a lot of people. Now, also, the internet was a whole lot slower back then.
Yeah, I was going to say, what year is this?
So it's 15 or 16 years ago. So we'd have to do the math.
So 1945. Got it.
Yeah. There you go. So, and it was like dial-up internet or smoke signals. But so
carrier pigeons.
Right. So I looked up though, where did these people go to school? And so this is like easily 80 solid hours worth of work to be looking up where did they go to school, what is their injury history, what was their job before. So if it's member of the staff, where they go to school, what certifications, what was their job before this, just to see if I could connect any dots. Did I know anybody? But also I wanted to have a background on them. I want to know about them. Personally, were they an athlete before they became part of the staff, that kind of thing. Right. So I've got all this information on them. And then with the athletes, I look up all that kind of information, but now I also look up their injury history because I've got to pick 3 athletes who are important enough to the team, who are doing decently in their careers, but also have some issues that maybe I might be able to help with, right, or they may seem like they would be more open to it. And then I sent by snail mail, because they're really, we had email back then, but you're not going to email these
AOL.
Right. Yeah. So I no, there was more to it. I should let you know that back then too, I bought all the URLs because nobody thought of this. I bought all the URLs for yoga for sports, yoga for football, yoga for baseball.
Wow, that's smart.
I own them all. They all point to my
to
website.
this day.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
wow.
Well, why am I going to give them up? It's like $10 a year. I got them. They're mine.
Oh, smart.
But if anyone wants to buy them for a couple $1,000s, I might be open to that since I don't really do yoga anymore. But I digress. So let's go back to, I send out all these letters to everybody. Now, I was in marketing, so I know that a response to a direct mail campaign, a successful response is like 3 to 4%. That's it, 3 to 4%. That's all you expect on direct mail. Mine was like 37 to 40%.
Why?
I started because it was customized, and also it was something that was completely different than anything that they'd been approached on before.
Okay.
And so my phone started ringing, and it was Warwick Dunn. It was Terry Francona. It was unbelievable. Terry Francona was actually the first. He was the manager of the Red Sox at the time. He was the first person to call me. And now remember, I'm from Boston, and so I've got some friends who know that I'm doing this. And Terry's got a pretty distinct, like, Midwest type of accent and voice that we'd all kind of mimicked before. So he calls me up, and I don't believe it's him. So, and I can't repeat on air what I said because I thought that it was someone messing with me, but I used the F word. And so that was my first conversation with Terry. Thankfully, I went on to work with him. He forgave me for that.
I bet he liked you even more because of it.
Yeah. He had to convince me that he was himself.
Yeah, FaceTime wasn't a thing back then either.
No. Yeah, so that was pretty hilarious. But yeah, and that was really the only time because people say, how do you market yourself? I said, that's what I did.
Oh.
And that was it. So I did that. And then I had more work than I could ever imagine. It was incredible.
It was work you were enjoying, though, right?
Right. And I was loving it. And I had so much to learn. And I never went into a team thinking that I knew enough to actually do a whole lot of good for them. I was there because I was smart enough to be able to get in the door, and then smart enough to be able to learn from them. How can I put my skill set to the best service for you?
Mm-hmm.
So, and that approach was, again, something that they weren't used to. You hire a consultant, they come in, they're on their soapbox, they're telling you what you're doing wrong.
Yeah.
I was going in, having the opportunity to work with these athletic trainers and strength coaches, and I wanted to learn everything I possibly could, because the more I understood about what they were trying to accomplish and how they were doing it, the more I would be better equipped to say, okay, maybe if I were to do this, this would work out better. And it was always a conversation, and I established relationships. And, there's probably some people out there who don't like me, but the right people do like me, and they just opened more doors and more doors and more. And it was incredible. Strength and conditioning is more like a family to me than just a network. Like, I have so many incredible friends who brought me in to work with their teams. And that was the other thing that I recognized too. I didn't recognize it right out of the gates, but I did come to learn it because they explained to me how this all worked. I mean, they have to get permission from their front office to bring me in. Mm-hmm. They have to stick their neck out for me. And that's pretty humbling, right? And so I never take that for granted. I'm always so grateful that they're willing to give me a chance, that they're willing to go to the front office, to their GM, to whoever, and say, no, I really want to bring this person in. And they're trusting me. And so when I go in there, I have to be, the utmost professional, and I have to show that I have value, and I have to have court awareness and know my place too. Like when I'm in a weight room, not getting in anyone's way, and making sure I'm of service, but not overstepping. There are so many nuances. Oh, stop. Sorry. There's so many. It's that time of day. So now UPS is bringing a package to the door.
So let's interrupt this show by asking you what kind of dogs you have.
So they're all rescues. I have a small, medium, and large. So Brody is a Rottweiler and Lab mix. And
Brody's the
Sadie,
big or small?
Brody's the big one, Rottweiler and Lab. Yeah. So he's 85 pounds.
Okay.
And then
he's kind of big.
Yeah, Sadie is about 40 pounds, and she is a Border Collie chocolate Lab mix.
Okay.
And then Copper, he's 19 pounds, which is good because they charge extra once he's 20 pounds when we board them. So I always tell him, you got to stay at 19 pounds.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But
on a meal plan.
He is, we joke and we call him a purebred Copper. We need to get the DNA test because this dog doesn't even look like a dog. We're not sure what he is. He's copper colored. He's got a hot dog body, but he doesn't look like a dachshund.
Hot dog. Yeah, we got dachshunds where I'm from. We got like 3 dachshunds.
Yeah, he's so crazy looking. But anyway, so yes, they're but I love them and I love all the chaos.
Once we started talking about them, they stopped barking. So I think they enjoyed the attention.
Yeah, well, I was looking at them. Yes, they are enjoying the attention, but yeah, the Rottweiler thinks now I'm going to hug him. He's a hugger. Brody is a hugger. He's 85 pounds and he thinks everybody should hug him. He literally wraps his arms around you. A lunatic.
I love it. So, hey, yeah. I want to ask, so you, so how did you kind of sell the whole yoga for sports things, like to GMs or to the individuals that you had to contact? Like, what was your sales pitch essentially on how you can help through yoga?
Well, so I did leave out a big part because again, I'm still, even with yoga, I'm a type A personality, and so one of the things I decided I needed was a book, and so that I could have a platform for like showing them this information. And so before I even reached out to all these organizations, and before I had quit my corporate job, I wrote a book called Yoga is Not One Size Fits All. I think somebody's still selling it on Amazon. Nobody should buy it though, because I would change most of it.
Rewrite it
at this point. Well, no, I have a back pain book out, and I just actually I've got another book that's going to be coming out with human kinetics next year. So I've got other books.
Yeah.
But I wrote this book, and so that I sent a copy of that book with pages earmarked in different sections. And in the book, like there were sections on hips and hamstrings, there were sections on T-spine, and there were sections core, those kinds of things. And so based on what I had learned about each person's injury history, also what position they played and that kind of thing, I earmarked pages in that letter that I sent them. I pointed these things out. So again, this was a package that most of these people had never seen. So that was it. That was how I sold my services. And then once I got in, then I realized how best to work with them. And so when people ask me, how do you work with teams? Like, are you involved in warm-ups? Do you create separate plans? Do you do recovery? Are you involved in rehab? Yes.
Yeah.
That's the answer. I am. So it depends on like if an athletic trainer brings me into a team and I'm working primarily with them, then a lot of it is rehab. So when I've worked with the Lightning, it's been all about rehab stuff. But then sometimes I'm integrating directly into strength and conditioning programs. And so it was helpful for me a few years ago to get my CSCS so I could really better understand how strength and conditioning programs are structured. Right. So then I could figure out, okay, what could be best superset here? Like, what is the goal in between sets? And if we're trying to recover, what could I do that could help assist with that recovery so we could superset some stuff? And then also like, let's see, in terms of warm-ups, what are they already doing? When I work with the WWE, I go in and I'll lead all the warm-ups they have different groups that I'll cycle throughout the course of the day. Because they have, I think it's like hour to 45-minute sessions, and the groups will have like 10 to 12 men or women in each of these groups. And the strength coach has his program for the day, and they'll say to me, okay, this is what we're going to be doing. So I want you to lead the 10-minute warm-up. So it's going to be mobility, stability, and activation. and, have at it.
Right.
And then he does that on a regular basis already. I mean, because I'm not there all the time, but the goal is introduce the athletes to something different because, there are so many different ways that you can get to that you can accomplish the same goal. And so let's see if there are some new tools that I can offer them that might resonate with them, and that they can add to their toolbox. So that's an entirely different way that I come in and work with teams. Sometimes I come in like with the Houston Texans. I came in for 2 days and did an in-service, a little bit of in-service with the staff, but then like almost the equivalent of an in-service with the athletes where it was just an introduction to the stuff that I do. And again, empowering them with some possible tools to add to their toolbox. So
Yeah,
it's different. It just depends.
Yeah, I got you. So I wanna kind of segue into one of the main, I guess, parts of what makes you you, and that's breathing. We kind of touched on breathing earlier, but I read on your website that you believe breathing is a superpower, and I'm like totally on board with that. Can you explain to the audience as far as like what that looks like?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So breathing is the only aspect of our autonomic nervous system that we can actually control. And there's a good reason for that. I mean, so many people think about it as just being automatic,
Yeah.
all the other aspects of our autonomic nervous system. Like we don't have to think about it to digest food or for our circulation to happen, our heartbeat, that kind of thing. Same thing with breathing. It's not going to stop if you stop thinking about it. However, if you do take conscious control of it, you can then have an influence over all the other aspects of your autonomic nervous system, including your physiology. You can change your physiology. You can, it's very powerful. And obviously we're not going to be able to get into all of the intricacies of how that works on this podcast, and that's not usually a tough sell for people to understand that. So that's not the thing that I tend to focus on too much. Because I can leverage that. I can leverage breathing to help people be able to fall asleep, to help people who are rehabbing to be able to get into more of a parasympathetic state for recovery. And that's, again, not a hard sell. The thing that people don't tend to realize is that breathing is a fundamental movement pattern, if not our most fundamental movement pattern. It's a movement pattern. Muscles and joints are involved in every breath that we take, or at least they should be, unless, of course, we end up in a compensatory breathing pattern that then it's just about muscles and we're recruiting all of these accessory breathing muscles and end up with a dysfunctional diaphragm. So that's the biggest thing that I try to get people to understand, because when you train breathing as a movement pattern, then just like breathing has an influence over all the other aspects of the autonomic nervous system, breathing as a movement pattern has influence over virtually all other significant movement patterns. Certainly all of the patterns involved in gait, so just walking, posture, any movements of our shoulder girdle. It's crazy to me that people don't recognize when they're training like T-spine rotation, they don't consider rib kinematics, and they don't consider the influence of the action of breathing in rib cage position on T-spine rotation. 12 of your ribs attached to your T-spine. If your ribs are stuck in one position and they're not mobile, then how is your T-spine going to be mobile? It's not. And the way that the diaphragm works, it really does require, to work optimally, it requires movement of the ribs. The ribs have to internally rotate to create that space for the diaphragm to dome. And then the ribs externally rotate when we inhale to help facilitate the contraction of the diaphragm, that flattening and lowering. And people don't understand that. And then they'll say to me, yeah, but it's so much easier to explain belly breathing. And I'm like, yeah, well, explain it to me, because you can tell me that you're breathing into your belly, but no matter where you decide you're directing air, it's always going into your lungs. And actually, when you push your belly out, when you're belly breathing, you can force a diaphragm contraction, but you're not creating you're not creating a pattern that your body's then going to adapt, because it's not functional. That's not functional breathing. Belly breathing isn't functional breathing. It's just not. It's not. There's no, and I hate even saying belly breathing. It actually drives me nuts, because you're not breathing into your belly. And then some people will say, yeah, but it's easier to use that terminology. And I'm like, really? It's easier to say belly than lungs or ribs? Like lungs and ribs, that's just too complicated for people to understand. Like, why not use the real terms? And diaphragm, that should not be a terrifying word. And certainly in our industry, it should not be a word that we're afraid to use because we don't understand it. The diaphragm is not only our primary respiratory muscle, it is a primary postural muscle. And so if you're going to talk to people about the psoas, you damn well better understand the diaphragm, since the psoas and the diaphragm, where they attach to the lumbar spine, they are so interconnected that they can't dissect them from one another in cadavers. So when you have a tight psoas, if you don't look at breathing patterns, then you're missing the boat, and it's just an uphill battle. And on that note, like, I'll say to people, listen, breathing, correcting breathing and creating optimal breathing, it's not always the only answer, although sometimes it is, but it's not always.
Side note.
But it is always the place to start. You are not going to mess somebody up more by giving them better breathing. There's no argument where you're going to say to me, no, I've got to work on the shoulder before I correct their breathing pattern. Really? Because the shoulder girdle and the rib cage, like your scapula, have no choice but to ride on the position of the rib cage, right? And their function, how well they glide, is dictated by that position of the rib cage. And do you know what dictates the position of the rib cage? That movement pattern that you do up to 24,000 times a day, breathing. That's going to dictate the position of the rib cage. Why would you start working on the rotator cuff, or I'm going to work on internal shoulder rotation and not address breathing?
So I know that a lot of the listeners that are listening right now that are trying to like paint the picture, right, of like what it looks like. And I know personal experiences. When I first got drafted, I was like 18, didn't know a thing about anything besides how to throw a ball. And like I breathed like, from my chest, right? So like carry a lot of stress. And like the first thing they taught me was like push your chest down, ribs down, force the breathing through the diaphragm. Now, can you kind of like paint the picture to the audience as far as like where to start, right? So if someone's listening right now and goes, okay, I want to breathe properly, and they're just sitting here just wanting to do it, what does that look like?
Well, so what I do when I'm training breathing is a little bit different than breathing properly. Just like if you were training gait, like if you're training someone to walk better, the walk that they're doing while they're working on the corrective is not going to look like the walk that they do out on the sidewalk once they master it, right?
Right.
So I want to be clear about that. It's a little more extreme. But with that said, so think about your rib cage and that split where the infrasternal angle is in the front. So that upside down V, or like the A-frame. Where the ribs split there, they're designed to move. Those ribs are designed to move. So when you exhale and we're working on training the breathing, I want to narrow that infrasternal angle. I want those ribs to internally rotate. On the exhale, I want you to get internal, external obliques, transverse abdominis, all fired up. Like your whole core should be turning on, and you completely empty your lungs. That's going to then, even though your whole core, with the exception of your diaphragm, is on, your diaphragm is actually relaxed, because your diaphragm now has this cage of the ribs, because you've narrowed that infrasternal angle and your ribs aren't stuck in a flare. It has this cage for the diaphragm to dome, because remember, its relaxed state is a dome, but it needs the space to dome. So you create that by turning on your core, getting those ribs to come in, get all of the air out. And everybody always says, I have to inhale to exhale. No, you don't. We always have some air stuck in there, and we're always manufacturing carbon dioxide. So you blow it out. You
It's
get
exhausting.
It all out.
It really
It
is
is.
like exhausting. You break a sweat.
It should be. Absolutely.
So can you
Yes.
do this laying down with like your legs up and knees in like a 90-degree angle, or is this like anywhere?
So yeah, you could do like, so the PRI 90-90 bridge at the wall was what I did initially all the time. Please stop, guys. Stop. They're like, it's a really good time to play right now.
I like how you get louder when they bark.
Oh, all right. You know what? I just let them out, but then they wouldn't stay out. So I'm just going to go outside. No. So yeah, so in the beginning, I did the 90-90 bridge all the time. And I did, and I want to make it clear that I learned a lot from PRI. I've taken 8 courses. I've studied at like all the research that they would reference in the back of their manuals. Then I went through and studied that research and read everything that I could possibly find.
Yeah.
And I learned it inside and out the best that I could. But in the context of my work, I found that it was too complex. It was too complex to explain. It was too complex. The exercises were addressing every single nuance of the movement. So like, move your right foot up, an inch and a half. And then we're going to take this arm up over your head, but only if, so there was
Pat
all
your
of
belly
this.
and rub your head.
Right. Yeah.
And
Seriously.
move your left big toe. It's exhausting.
Right. But now listen, I'm not saying that the exercises weren't terrific, but if you can't get compliance, it doesn't matter how fantastic your freaking exercises are if no one is doing them. And also if people are having difficulty teaching them. So that's the thing that I'm encountering, being in weight rooms, we've got loud music on. And now also I'm only going to see these athletes maybe once or twice a week. And I'm going to come back, and this has happened before. I come back and I say, okay, how did you do? And even the strength coach had known what the exercise was. We had taken a picture of it on the phone. And then he shows me and he's doing the opposite. So he's got the opposite leg raise. So he was actually feeding into the compensatory pattern. He did it every day. And I'm like, all right, something's got to give here because it's just too complex. So what if I break it down to lowest common denominator? So what I started doing, because a lot of times I'll have groups of guys and I'll have a ton of Latin guys. They don't speak English. You know what? I hate to put it on them. I don't speak Spanish. So it's hard to communicate with them. I've got to make this as easy as possible. So I started doing this thing I call a breathing bridge. It's almost like a glute bridge. It's very similar to the 90-90. A lot of the same cues, a lot of similar cues, not the same, because I'm looking a little bit more for glute activation and transverse abdominis and than I am hamstrings. At the wall with the PRI 90-90 bridge, there's a lot more hamstring.
Yeah, you're
engagement.
pulling down on it. Yeah.
Yes, I'm not doing that. And you know what I found? I got compliance and I made changes and I wasn't even addressing asymmetry.
Simple is better.
Simple. And it's been about 3 years now that I've been doing it that way. And that's just, and I've been criticized. I have been criticized by some PRI people and they're like, you're not teaching PRI right. And I'm like, I'm not teaching PRI. I'm not.
Well, it
doesn't work for me.
Yeah, it's teaching like anything that's like repeatable, right? I mean, you can have like the best routine in the world, but if it doesn't like A, fit your lifestyle, or B, isn't something that's repeatable each and every day, then it's not a good routine for you. And that's like, you hit it on the head as far as like baseball players go, right? We grow up literally just throwing a ball or hitting a ball and catching a ball and whatever. And then we were introduced to the big picture of things like, oh, we have to do mobility, we have to do breathing, we have to focus our minds. Like there's so much more into it, right? That can get overwhelming.
Yes.
I think it's important to it's simplifying,
Yes. Simplifying and then getting buy-in. And every time I say buy-in, I think of my friend, Brett Bartholomew, because that's his big thing now, getting buy-in. And so I took I took one of the parlor tricks that I had learned from PRI, and Mike Cantrell, one of the best instructors at PRI. I love Mike. He was the one who called it a parlor trick. Now he would use PRI techniques to get to the same result that I can use my lowest common denominator breathing bridge exercise and get the same result too. But it's the internal rotation test. And now I don't measure it. I just show people. But what I do is I take one of the guys. So when I was at the Houston Texans, I took one of the quarterbacks up to the front of the group, and I did a test of his internal shoulder rotation so everybody could see. Did it on both sides just so we'd look at both sides. And then I took him through 5 breaths in a breathing bridge, coaching him through the rib kinematics, guiding his ribs. I'm not pressing. I'm not like, if you're familiar with PRI, you know that there can be a lot of pressure and a lot of, I'm not doing any of that. I'm
2 kettlebells on your ribs.
Well, no. That's an exaggeration, but like there's a lot more manual stuff. I'm not doing that. I'm guiding him through it, empowering him to do it, to understand what it should feel like. 5 breaths that I recheck the internal shoulder rotation on both sides, and everybody sees the change. And sometimes it can be like 30 degrees.
How crazy is that?
It's crazy.
So why is that? Why is that? I mean, if people are listening going like, how is that possible? How does breathing properly affect internal shoulder rotation? Because my internal sucks too. So I'm sitting here literally recording this like in the 90 of my arms breathing. Oh, that's funny.
Right. Well, so it's simple, because remember, if you're in a compensatory pattern, like you told me that, you were stuck in that shallow breathing pattern.
Now, what do you mean by compensatory? For those of you who don't know that word.
Yeah. So that's where other muscles start to compensate, because muscles work in chains, right? And so there's a chain reaction through your body. If one muscle becomes dysfunctional in a pattern, then there's a chain reaction and other muscles have to pick up the slack. But now if this muscle starts being a breathing muscle and can't do its job, then there's another muscle that has to pick up the slack for that muscle.
So you essentially isolate like the specific muscles that need to be recruited for the task?
Well, yes and no. Like I used to be way more specific about it. But now I get the major ones, and then everything kind of falls into place. But let me get back to what this compensatory pattern is. So the primary one that most human beings and athletes especially tend to end up with is this shallow chest breathing pattern, which recruits front of shoulder, pec minor, scalenes, upper traps, all of these muscles. Now, remember, you can take up to 24,000 breaths a day. That means those muscles are firing up to 24,000 times a day to be accessory breathing muscles. So if they're firing that much, they're going to be pretty damn tight, right? And then when you're asking for them to be loose enough to be mobile, even if you stretch them out, they're going to come right back, because that you haven't fixed the movement pattern that keeps them firing 24,000 times a day. But what I do in that 5 breaths with the quarterback on the ground, right? What I did was I restored the proper movement pattern for his breathing, for the action of breathing, which then turned off the compensatory pattern, gave all those muscles back to their primary roles. Now, it didn't last, and I tell them that all the time. It takes about 2 weeks of doing 2 sets of 5 breaths. That's it. It's not a huge commitment, but 2 sets of 5 breaths in this breathing bridge every day. And then your body starts to take on that pattern, just like with any other corrective exercise. You don't own it. Like, so I'll say to them, yeah, that internal rotation is wonderful, but by the time you get back up and walk back to, where you were sitting, you're going to be back to your old pattern, because you don't own it yet. Not yet, but you can. You just have to practice it every day for those 2 weeks. And then after that, you have to maintain it. And I want to be clear about something too, because people are like, just like, how we hear about like the anterior pelvic tilt is going to kill you, like there's this exaggeration of things where we take something that can be deemed bad in certain circumstances and decide it's just bad across the board. That shallow breathing pattern is an adaptation that humans have, so that like if I'm going to sprint, I'm not going to be using my diaphragm. I am actually going to need that shallow breathing pattern for that short sprint. Because that's going to work best.
Probably you have it.
circumstance. That's why we have it. But it's not something we're supposed to live in. And when we live in it, we also live in a chronic sympathetic state, which is that aspect of your nervous system that's fight or flight, because you have to be able to breathe deeply to be able to truly switch into the parasympathetic, the rest and restore state of your nervous system. So that's why, going back to breathing as a superpower, it influences all of those things. So just changing your breathing pattern, and what did I say would do that? 2 sets of 5 breaths.
Simplicity, man. Simplicity.
It's not that hard.
Yeah. So I know I do, man. I want to be respectful of your time. I know we got you're on the East Coast, right? So it's almost 3 there.
Yeah. I'm waiting. I actually probably have 7 more minutes.
Oh no, I was just going to go ahead and cut it, but I wanted to, before we got off. So the people that are listening to it, as I am, I'm really intrigued, right? And I want to see this in action. Now, do you have a YouTube channel that I can link in the show notes for people to get directed to see the movements in person or on screen?
Yes. Yeah. My YouTube channel, you can find me as Mobility Maker. But I think the actual URL is the youtube.com Dana Santis.
Okay.
It's the only
I'm sure it's on your website.
I have that's my real name. But yes, it's on my website. I don't have a ton of breathing videos up there. I post a lot on social media, especially on Instagram. I do what I call breathing breaks. And so on my Instagram TV, my first one does go over that. Yeah, I don't do it as much as I should. But also I do have, I mentioned that other book. The other book that's going to be coming out next year is on breathing, and it's on all of these things. And there'll be an ebook version with links to videos of exercises as well. And so
ebooks, yeah. Hashtag 2018, huh?
Well, there'll be a printed version too, and then you can still access all the videos. I still like printed.
Me
books,
too. I can't read an ebook. I have 9 books stacked up to the right of me right now. Okay, well, hey, thanks so much for coming on. Sorry if that took a little bit longer than I originally planned, but there's just a lot of good, juicy stuff in there. And I'm going to direct all the listeners and even the people that tune into my Instagrams to you, because how it usually works is I get questions upon some of the things we talked about, and I'll just direct them to you because you're obviously a lot more intelligent and use bigger words than I do. Speaking of that, word of the day is antithesis. For those who are wondering, I have no idea what it means. I wrote it down, definitely spelt it wrong, but I'll make sure to look that up and write a survey on it.
It's a fancy word for opposite. So antithesis, it's the opposite. I told you I'm a nerd. I'm sorry.
I love it.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Well, thank you again for coming on, and I'll sign you off the air. But thanks again.
All right. Thank you.
All right, guys. That's another episode of the Robby Row Show. Do me a favor, if you liked the episode, or even if you didn't like it, go ahead and leave me a review on whatever platform you're listening to. Not only does it help me out with popularity on my show, but it also helps me out as a host of this podcast. Sometimes I don't know if I'm getting better or if I'm getting worse, and I need y'all's opinions. So go ahead and leave a review and let me know what you thought. So again, thank you so much. Appreciate you guys tuning in. Until next time, Robby Rollin', the Robby Row Show. Your boy's out. Later.